episode, Piping Talks, another drummer. Actually, a very good friend of mine. We've played together in a band in Scotland for a few years, and it's awesome to have him on to talk drum life and all of his story and jokes and all the good stuff that he has to share with us. So we have Olav, all the way from Australia now, but originally from the Netherlands. And I've heard recently that we shouldn't say Holland, we should say the Netherlands. So originally from the Netherlands, lived in Scotland, and now in Australia. So tons of stuff to cover. I'm very, very excited about this one. So yeah, Olav, how are you doing?
Yeah, very well. Thank you. Thanks for having me on. I've been listening to some of your episodes previously, so it's good to hear some of the stories from other people, and it just shows you that basically everybody's story is different. Doesn't matter where you're from, which I think this is a absolute brilliant thing to do, because it gives people an insight how people get to where they got or where they currently are. So yeah, great.
Yeah, well, I'm glad, and I'm glad you understood me. Which is a running joke about my accent, which probably changed from the time you last talked to me. But first off, I'm just so curious. How is someone from the Netherlands end up playing the drum, the pipe, the Scottish snare drum?
Yeah, it's a funny story. It's a funny story. Obviously, when you contacted me, I had to start doing some serious thinking, because obviously I'm getting older. But probably when I think it was about 6 or 7 years old. I think it was my mum saw an advert in a local newspaper about a local pipe band looking for members. So my mum decided, I'm going to give that a shot. Actually, I might have been younger than that, actually, because I think I've seen photos of me in an actual pram going to competitions. So my mum gave that a shot. She started learning the pipes. Then my dad followed suit. They kind of got, integrated into the local grade 4 band. So when we were little kids, we used to go to competitions. Then I think my dad became the pipe major at some stage. I can't remember if I had already joined. But obviously, being constantly involved in going to competitions or some kind of gigs that they were doing, I was obviously quite interested. I think when I was around the age of 7, I obviously I'd somehow come to the conclusion that I wanted to become a drummer, and then I think they waited until I was about 8 to 8.5 years old, where they said, right, okay, you can start getting some lessons at their local band. I think they waited initially because in the old days we didn't have the small drums. Everything was like, massive
Right.
drums, big like leather slings. So I think they had a bit of a concern of, you're only little, you're going to have to carry something around that's going to be 10, 11 kilos at the time. The old premiers. So started getting some lessons. And then it became probably clear fairly quickly that I was pretty good. There was only a certain level that you could reach. So I played in the local grade 4 band, I think, until I was about, I'm trying to think, I must have been about 14, 15. And then at the time we moved to Belgium. We moved to Brussels for my father's work. And I joined the Antwerpen District Pipe Band, which was probably one of the top grade 3 bands on mainland Europe. So I'm pretty sure we must have moved in around the August timeframe, because I think the move was done around school holidays, and because I've got a younger brother and an older sister, so I think my parents moved around the school holidays. And then I think I played. They had a B band, which was in grade 4, and then they had the A band, which was in grade 3. I think I played for one competition in the B band, and then I got moved to the grade 3 band. Played for a couple of seasons, and then I actually became the leading drummer. So I think I must have only been about 16 or 17, I reckon.
Oh, wow.
And then I played there for about, we were only in Belgium for 3 years. And then we actually moved back to Holland. So we always kept our place in Holland. It was about a 2.5 hour drive to Antwerp. So, okay. Which, when you are younger, you think it's quite normal. But my dad used to drive me to the band practice in Antwerp. I think it was every second Friday. So he would drive 2.5 hours there because I wasn't driving yet, and then I would go to band practice, and then he would drive me 2.5 hours back.
That's
So
crazy.
yeah, so you don't realize that when you're a kid, those days that was quite unusual. Everybody played in bands nearby. These days everybody plays everywhere, but it was quite unusual. But you don't realize that until you're older that you kind of go like, well, if it wasn't for my parents and the commitment that they made for me, I probably wouldn't be where I am now. So, like, one of the funny things is when I started playing, I used to get these exercises, and I used to hate doing exercises. But every lunchtime, I used to come home from primary school. My dad used to come home for lunch, and he would sit me down for 20 minutes, half an hour, and I would have to play through the exercises. Now, my dad was
Is
a
that right?
piper, so he was a piper, so he didn't really, he kind of knew the ins and outs, but he wasn't a drumming guy. But he just goes like, if you want to be good at it. So I think from a very young age, unintentionally, they've kind of instilled that kind of thing of, like if you're going to do something, do it properly. So
Wow. Well, that's yeah, it's an approach that is it's awesome to hear. I mean, it paid off because you ended up we'll talk about it later, but you definitely made it through to the final of the World Solos. So
yeah,
definitely paid off, and I bet your dad is very proud of it, of that
yes.
moment. Was it like popular in the Netherlands to play pipes and drums? Was it something that like people were doing?
It was something that was really, wasn't really normal. And what I found when I was a kid, because when you try and explain it to people, like, probably you were a bit more lucky being in France, the kind of Baghate band, that's quite, an institution. In Holland, it's not. So a lot of my mates at school had no idea what I was doing. So, literally, I wouldn't really tell anybody. Like I used to play hockey, I used to swim, but nobody really knew that I was playing in kind of pie bands because, especially when you're like a young kid, you're maybe 11, 12 years old, I don't know if it was like the whole bullying thing, but I always been like, well, if I don't have to tell people, then I don't tell them because it is a very kind of unique little kind of world, So I kind of kept it quiet. But then obviously in '98, I got the option. Well, I got the opportunity to go and play in Scotland, and then obviously people kind of went like, "Oh, why are you going to Scotland?" So then it kind of came out. But by that age, by that stage, I think I was about 21,
Right.
and then I moved to Glasgow basically, and that's really where my playing kind of took off.
Right, right, right. Yeah, that's I was going to say it's probably not something that I mean I don't know now it's different, but at the time I imagine it was not something popular and like you said, if you want to be the cool kid, it could be a hit or miss, right? You could be like, hey, I'm a pipe and drummer
Yes.
or hey, I'm a pipe and drummer. What? So
And, and,
it could
and
be one.
Yeah, I think it was always the kind of thing like, people go like, oh, that's really interesting. And then they go like, you have to wear a skirt. And then you go like, oh,
Oh
but it's
yeah.
cool. And then, it kind of turned into this whole, so I think I might have told one or two people. And then I just went like, you know what, if I don't need to tell anybody, then,
Right.
why should I
Yeah.
tell anybody? I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
at
yeah,
that
yeah.
stage, yeah, my playing was not of the level yet where I kind of went like, it's just another hobby, really. So.
Right, right, right. And so you mentioned, and we're going to talk about it now. It's like you made the transition, you made the move to go over to Glasgow and go to Scotland. That's quite a big move. I mean, you're 2021, and you're changing country, language, and everything. And basically, you wrap your life and you move over. Was it purely drumming? Was it something else? And was it at that moment where you felt like you were really into drumming, you love drumming, and you were like, I want to make a more than a hobby and I want to make like a living out of this? Was it sort of like all combination of all that kind of stuff?
I think I came to the point where, like I was probably about 16, 17. You can put any world's CD on, and by the two intros, I could probably tell you what band it was and what year it was, and if it was a medley or an MSR. Because I was that kind of away from Scotland all the time that I just got really kind of into, I wanted to play the best scores. I wanted to, my aim was to play at the highest level in the world. So I was very realistic about it. I'm going like, well, if I want to do that, then I'm either going to have to move to Scotland or I would have to move to Canada, something like that. we used to go to Scotland all the time for holidays. So every year we used to go to Scotland because my parents were obviously involved in pipe bands. They liked going there. So every year we went to Scotland. A lot of the times, people like Tom Brown or Arthur Cook would come over and they would judge in Holland. So I started chatting to him or to them. And then if it was up to me, I would have moved to Scotland when I was 17. But again, at the time, my parents were like, no, finish your education, do what you do. And then, you can basically go across and, do your thing. Like at the time, there was people like, I think Jake Jervison, he was a couple of years after me moving to Scotland, but people like Bernard Burdana, who was playing at SFU at the time, who I knew from, like, I think there's photograph somewhere of me and Bernard playing together in Belgium somewhere when we're both, I think, 13 or 14 in a pub. So I kind of grew up that kind of age. And then the opportunity came to me when I was talking to Arthur Cook one year. He said, well, he was at Polkemmet. He said, well, I was about to finish my my studies in Holland, and the deal was kind of made. He said, well, why don't you come and play in my drum corps? So I remember the deal was made because at the time we didn't have, we didn't really email, we didn't do all that kind of stuff. So he said, right, what I'll do is, he said, I'll send you a cassette tape and I'll send you the music of both MSRs, both medleys and some free tunes. Just make sure that you basically have it off when you come across. So I was like, okay. And I remember the day that it arrived, it was in the morning, it was a big A4 piece envelope, and I was just like, like a kid at Christmas. I'm pretty sure I actually bunked school that day, and I basically went like, right, I'm not going. And I think by nighttime, I could play both MSRs and both medleys. And then I was very much at that time all about listening, and basically trying to blend in and all that kind of stuff. So I had a few months. Then I somehow managed at the end of my education, I had to do a work experience thing. I somehow managed to blag a spot at a youth hostel in Glasgow to do that over there. So, which basically meant, because it was all focused on, like, I was finishing school at, like, I think it was June, July, but that was too late for the season. But I had to do a 6 or 4 month work experience thing, which basically then allowed me to go at the start of the year, which basically allowed me to build up to the season. So the first year was 1998 when I played at Polkemmet. So I played there for about 2 seasons. And because Arthur was in the police, then in 2000, we got the opportunity to go back to Lothian Borders. So we had a new pie major, which was Colin McClellan, who took over. So there was a whole kind of new band put together. So we went across with the full drum corps, went back to grade 2. And then I think, if my memory serves me correctly, I think we entered 15 competitions that season because we were competing almost every week.
Wow.
And I think we won 14 of them in drumming. So we did the Grand Slam at the majors, which was in grade 2, and then we went up to grade 1. And then I played there until about 2005, really. And then I think, there comes a time where you kind of go like, right, well, I want to make that next move. I'm not afraid to say, like, Jake was a very good thing for me to look at and go like, well, he came straight into shots. He was winning majors, and I'm going like, well, I wouldn't mind winning a few majors or, doing something like that. And then I knew one of the guys in Eric's corps, Eric Ward at Strathclyde. So in the winter of, I think it was the end of the season of 04. Was it 04? No, I think it was 05. I moved across to Strathclyde, which at the time, like Arthur Cook did, he was like almost, when I came over, he did such a massive job for me. He was more or less my kind of second dad. He looked after me. It's funny now because I see his girls playing again, and, I go like, well, I knew them when they were like 3 years old. So, it makes me feel old. But yeah, he was really, from like a personal point of view, he did a massive thing for me. From a playing point of view, I reckon he's one of the most underrated guys that has ever played. Him and actually kind of Eric as well. These guys were so, crafty. They were so technical. They came out of the kind of Duthard era. They played together there. They were very, very, very big believers of, if you can play it on the left, you can play it on the right. So, my schooling really continued, from being kind of held, at home by my dad, going like, you need to be able to do all this stuff, to then go to Arthur. And, Arthur really kind of cemented that in with me. And then I basically went to Strathclyde, and then kind of my playing career kind of took off. I was lucky the first winter because I ended up having like almost one-on-ones with Eric every week, because most of the guys were basically cops. So what they did in the winter, they kind of used to take a break, but because I was new, Eric went like, well, he said, I'm going to be at the practice if you want to come. So I sat down with Eric almost every week with one or two of the other guys, which allowed me to really blend in. And it kind of paid off, because that winter I made my first world solo drumming final. So
yeah, that's crazy. You were full time in Scotland at that point. You were fully living in Scotland. That was and it's so interesting to hear how you made the move. And Jake actually had a similar story. It was with Jim, but you with Arthur, and like having someone that is really there from a drumming standpoint, but also from like just life, help you, blend into the country and move in and kind of like be more familiar with things. And it's so important if you're a foreigner to kind of like have that kind of person.
And it's like little things, right? The first time I went to practice, Arthur drove to Glasgow because he was living in Edinburgh. He drove to Glasgow, picked me up, we went for lunch, and then, it was all kind of, relaxed. And I was pretty nervous, because I'm going like, well, he's kind of heard me play in the solos, but he's never heard me play his stuff. So then, we went for lunch, came home, I met his lovely wife, the two girls who were just toddlers, and then we went into the kind of dungeon room where he does all his drumming. So, and it was literally like, right, well, here we go, let's have a hit. And we played, and he goes like, I think you'll be all right. And then that night, we went to the band practice in, I think it was Whitburn, and we practiced on this big stage, and he just basically gave me a drum and a harness, and he said to the guys, right, this is Olav, and he'll be joining the corps. And I remember the first couple of practice, I was getting these looks of like, who the hell is this guy? He's just come in, he's just playing like that, and for the first probably 3-4 months, I was on a constant high. Every time I would basically lift to go to the band practice. And then the first comp, I was trying to think about this the other day, what my first competition was. But I think it might have been Dunbar. And so it was literally kind of, a dream come true for me.
Right. That's all you thought about. That's all you wanted to do. You were there for that. Yeah. Wow, that's very cool. I mean, I can totally relate to that. Like you've wanted to move to Scotland, you wanted to be part of this, and now you're in it. Like, of course, it's amazing, right? So, and then you did Strathclyde for a few years, and you think that it was a big style change. You're talking about how it's a little bit more like in-depth, like drumming conversation, but you're mentioning how everything, you play on the right has to play on the left. Like it's very sort of rudimental. And do you feel like the style was different or very different? You had to adapt, or it was sort of similar, but because you had those one-on-ones? And what do you think changed in your style from being a core member to a finalist at the World Solos?
I think the big difference that I found with going from Arthur's chord to Eric's chord, it's very similar style music. It's very similar written. It's the same kind of rudiments. But what I found with Eric is Eric was very, very, very particular on how he plays stuff. And he always used to say it's not what you play, but it's how you play stuff. And that was really kind of, the big difference for me. I didn't realize it at the time. I don't think technique wise I changed a lot going from Arthur to Eric. But I think with Eric would put stuff in, and he, initially if it wouldn't work, he goes like, well, we're going to have to make it work. So he would come up with, and it's all about how we played certain things. When I had my first winter, I literally just played. I went to the World Solo Drumming. I had to play in the heats. I made the semi-final, and I think I've made the semi-final previous to that when I actually played for Arthur. And then I played the semi-finals. I played quite well. I wasn't expecting anything. It was still held at the school in, I think, Whitburn at the
Bathgate.
time. Oh,
Right, or
Bathgate, yeah,
Whitburn,
sorry.
yeah.
And, yeah, on like the massive wooden stage with, and I remember having lunch with Eric, and for some reason my sister and my brother-in-law were over visiting, so they'd come out. And I was having lunch, and I'm just chatting to Eric, and we're just chatting away, and my sister comes up and she goes like, "Oh, you're in the final." And I was like, yeah, okay, well, whatever. And I just continue eating. And she goes like, "No, seriously." And I was like, "Yeah, whatever." And then Eric kind of gets up, and it was kind of those times, these guys were always in the final. So he goes like, "Right." He said, "Well, I better find out when I'm on." So we walk out of the canteen, and we bump into this guy, one of the, I think, stewards, in the hallway. And he goes like, "Oh, Eric, you're on second." And then he turns to me and he said, "Oh, Olav," he said, "you're on," I think it was seventh or eighth. He said, "You just got to remember that you're after Jim and before Reed Maxwell." And I just went like, "Oh boy, this might be a bit of an issue." So because I had no hornpipe jig.
I was gonna say, yeah.
I really did not expect that. So I basically walked back, and there was a guy called Russell Weir who played for me, one of the pipers. I think he played at Strathclyde, and then he went to the Power. And one of the other guys played for me. And, we just sat there, and I just took like 10 minutes going like, damn, I'm in the final. Okay, well, so, and Russell was actually really good. And I don't think he actually realized, but he just went like, "Well, you got nothing to lose, have you?" So, and I was like, "Yeah, fair enough." So we just picked an actual hornpipe jig from the band's medley. And I remember standing in the hallway listening to Jim finishing his MSR, and I just went like, "Holy moly, that is so good." And I literally walked on, stood on the stage, and another bit that I wasn't afraid of, but one of the judges was Arthur Cook that year, and I'd obviously just left his kind of court, and moving from L&B to Strathclyde at the time was almost moving from like Celtic to Rangers. So it was a bit kind of like controversial. Like there were some guys in the court that were not very happy with me. Arthur, I was very honest with him. I said, "Listen, I'm going to go to Eric's court." He wasn't obviously pleased, but I think he was appreciative of the fact that I was open to him. And I said, "Well, this is the reason why I want to go, because the band was in the top 6 all the time." And I said, I actually want to win some stuff, and and I think so. But you stand on the stage, and I'm just going like, "Man, that's the guy whose drum corps I've just left." And then I just turned around to Russell Weir, and he goes like, "We got nothing to lose, mate." And I was like, "Yeah." And I actually played really well. And yeah, so for the next 3 years, I managed to actually make the final. So I think the highest I got was 8th. I think that was in 2017.
That's awesome. I love, again, that's like the reason I do these conversations, because there's so much stories behind the scene that you don't hear, or that you don't know. I mean, those are conversations we'll probably be having at a bar, having a beer or whatever. But yeah, it's I love it. Like how what went through your head and your first impression and reaction to making it to the final, which is a big achievement. I mean, at that time, like you said, you had maybe 8-9 guys that were always there, and they were all leading drummers. So like, go get your spot in there, which is really difficult. That's great. And then from there, which is where I really got to know you, you moved to Boghall for what, 4 seasons you played? I think something like that.
I think I went to Boghall in 2010. So the main reason why I actually left Strathclyde was nothing to do with a playing point of view, but at that time I'd actually joined the police. So although I was working in the same area as where the band was, I wasn't actually part of the band. So basically what would happen, like I never expected to make a living out of my playing. But what would happen is, because I was in the same kind of area, so I was in Partick, which is just out of the kind of city centre, when it came to Worlds Week, I would get seconded to the band unit. So my job was to play in the band, which, was like I remember standing at the Worlds one day, and my now wife Rachel, who I met at Lothian Borders, she goes like, "You're getting paid to be here," and I was like, "Yeah, this is a bit unreal, you know." Like, but the thing was, I never really wanted to be a police officer, but I knew a lot of people because obviously Lothian Borders Police, I was a guest player. Strathclyde Police was a guest player, and then I joined the job. But what I found the struggle between the band and the work. There was a lot of like kind of political stuff happening during that time. So I just almost felt that by the time I came to band practice, I just couldn't be bothered anymore because there was always kind of political nonsense happening. People were talking, so I basically went like, right, I need to find a different band. The reason why I went to Boghall is because just before I moved to Scotland, I got offered by Tom to go and play with Boghall. But, was it the right or wrong decision? Tom basically said to me, and, you having come through the system kind of, at them, he said, well, you will be coming to play in my corps in grade 2. And I kind of was a bit pig-headed when like, well, no, the reason why I'm moving to Scotland is because I want to play in grade 1. I don't want to play in grade 2. So foolishly or good enough, foolishly, I don't know. I said to Tom, thanks, but no thanks. And I went to join Arthur's course. So I then went to Gordon and I said, listen, I'm looking to change course. I want to join the Bogies. So that was.
And he said you have to play grade 3.
Well, yeah. So he said yes. He said I would have had you years ago. I think that was one of the first things that he said to me. He said I know, Dad offered you grade 2 and you said no, but yes, I would have you basically, tomorrow. So again, I got all the stuff sent. That was a massive, massive, massive style change for me.
I was gonna say, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm like a great believer. There's certain drum corps or there's certain leading drummers, that I won't bother playing their scores because the only ones that can make them look good are they. Like you have Gordon, you got Reed, Jim, to a degree. These guys, their drum corps know how to play those scores. I'm not even going to try and put something on it like that. So I went to Boghall. I remember the first band practice I walked in. Neil Cranston was there. I sat down. Gordon went like, nah. And he turned to Neil and he said, Neil, take him in another room. And it was literally, it's probably the most scared I've ever been at a band practice. And because Neil was very like, if you didn't know Neil, he was very kind of like, this is it. So he went like, right, let's go. So he played through 2 MSRs, 2 medleys. He goes like, didn't say anything. Basically said, right, let's go. And we went back and we basically sat down with the rest of the corps. We started playing, or we kind of jumped in because they were playing, and then we stopped. And Gordon turns around to Neil and he goes like, and he goes like, he'll be all right. And that was basically it. So, and that's literally that was my first introduction to Neil. Sadly, he obviously passed that winter, which was a massive, massive, massive blow for everybody. Like I had only met him, maybe a couple of months, but once he passed, it became kind of clear to me what a kind of influence he was for Gordon. And then I had the honor, and it was an absolute honor to play in his sport. And then I'm pretty sure for the whole season I played his drum. And then at the end, I think it was put in like a glass cage and it was given to his wife. So yeah, so that was,
Heather, yeah.
It was a really sad kind of time, but it was a really kind of honored and kind of very kind of privileged, that Gordon basically said, well, I know you've just come in, but I trust you that you can stand on the flank and basically do the job that he would have done. And it was good because I can't remember because I was thinking about it. Were you there the first season when I was there?
Yeah, because I did Juvis in 2008, and then I did the first grade 1 season. I didn't do the whole season. I just played the Worlds in 2009. And then I was living in Australia, and I remember very well. I was, because obviously now I'm talking to Care, and I was trying to remember how was I ever in touch with Gordon or anyone from the band? Because I was, at the time, yeah, sure, Facebook was on, but like, I'm not saying I'm like super old, but it was just a different relationship, right? And so I would look through some emails and even our conversation. And when I went back from Australia to Scotland to spend the summer, it was the beginning of May, beginning of May. I went to your place to play the stuff,
Yes.
just to make sure that I didn't lose everything back in Australia and just didn't play drum for 8 months. And yeah, I remember very well. Rachel was there, and we had food. And we went to band practice. So yeah, I remember, and that was the first time I didn't know you really at that time. I mean, we knew of each other, but it was not like nothing personal. Yeah, we went through this stuff and then went to band practice. So it's funny hearing the story and how like Arthur, and obviously it was not your core, but and I had been in the band before, but always open to welcome someone to your place and do that. I did that with Alan. I did that with Gordon, with Tom. So I, definitely the same sort of pattern. People are always very welcoming. I've never heard anyone that didn't or declined anything, for me to come and have a jam or play. So, but yeah, that's the first time I actually properly talked to you and played with you, and then went to band practice and we did the whole season all together. So it's great. Yeah.
It's great. So I played in 2010. I played the full season, and then in January 2011. So it was already on the cards that we were going to move to Australia because, as well, people might know, my wife is from here. So, and she wanted to move back home. And, it was kind of a conflicting thing for me because in the one way, I was probably at the top of my playing career. But, you kind of have to make sacrifices sometimes, or, you basically go like,
sunny Australia or rainy Glasgow.
Yes.
You were not in Glasgow, you were in Livingston, right, at the time, but like similar weather. It's a tough choice when you think about it.
Yeah, so I was in Scotland. Well, if you see the weather at the moment, it could almost be Scotland. But after 13 years of rain, I kind of went like, well, she wants to move to Adelaide. It's the driest state in the driest continent of the world. I think I'll be all right. So I spoke to Gordon. I said, I'm going to move to Australia. And he goes like, oh. So, well, you just got here. I said, I know. I said, but I want to continue playing. And at the time, we obviously had Scott Burrell, who was flying in from New Zealand. And I said to him, well, for 2011, I'll come back. I think I moved out in end of January. But I think I was back in Scotland in the end of June. And then I stayed all the way until the end of the season. I'd met some great people during my Boghall time. One of the families is the Boyle family. Their son Cameron, he played juvenile. I was teaching the juvenile at the time. So whenever I would come back, I would stay with them. They were kind of my second family. Then 2012 came. I came back again, and that was kind of the big year because we played the concert, and then we ended up winning the Worlds with the drumming. So it's quite funny because I made this kind of list when I was a kid. I must have been about 16, 17. You make like a bit of a tick list, and you go like, well, I want to win the Worlds, I want to do the concert, and I wouldn't mind being in the World Solo Drumming Final. Now the last one, I never expected. 2012 was really the one where I could take the final one off. That was a great year. We had so much fun. We had the foreign contingent within Boghall.
We had a lot of fun, yeah.
Yeah, which was, and I think that's what really kind of helped, we very much we were one big family. Although we came from everywhere, we had you, we had Mike, the German, the crazy German, we had Robert, who was obviously from Holland, myself, but we all really, really, really wanted to be there. I think that just allowed us to kind of blend in with the core, and, we didn't, we might have been recording a few headaches, but it was more from what the hell are they doing now? I don't think it was from a playing point of view.
So Freddie helped move to Australia, or to really say, I've achieved everything I wanted to achieve, I think it's fair to say I can go and fully move to Australia and not have to come back for the season. But
Yeah. So I still continued on to play with the band for another 2 seasons. So I think it was 2013 was probably one of my, this is where I think I kind of transitioned from, just being a core player. Like I was teaching the juveniles, helping out with them. And then in 2013 and 2014, I actually stood next to Cameron Boyle in the drum corps, who, I used to stay with all the time and who was like, like a little kid. And I remember there's a video, and I watched it recently, where we're just tuning up. And he's standing next to me, and I'm going like, oh, that's probably where I kind of got like, oh, this is good, teaching people and then seeing them achieve, maybe goals that they hadn't set themselves. So when I moved to Adelaide, I got contacted by City of Adelaide, which was a grade 2 band, and I think somehow they got wind that I was moving across, because my wife Rachel had contacts within the pipe band world here. So they said, do you want to take the drum course? So the minute I moved over, like when I started writing music for them, I very much adopted the kind of Boghall philosophy, where you have like 20 versions. It starts with version 1. Like I remember coming to practice and going like, yeah, I've got this, and then going and goes like, what on version 7? And you're looking at version 5, and I'm going like, oh, obviously I haven't got this, but that's what I did with them, because I didn't really know the players. So I kept it very simple, and then I just kind of increased, the kind of technical stuff. In the second season in charge, 2012, we won the drumming at the Australian National Championships, which was good.
nice.
I think we got second as a band. And what I'd done is, when I left Scotland, I actually resigned from the police. I just went like, right, I'm done doing policing stuff. I've done it for 4 or 5 years. Then I went back into HR, which was good because it was a Monday to Friday job. But after about a week, I realized I'm not really built for Monday to Friday. So I joined the police here.
All right.
So I played with City of Adelaide probably till about 2014. And then my work kind of started taking off. And you kind of come to a point where you go like, well, I've got to make some sacrifices. And it just came purely to the point that the direction that they wanted to go wasn't really the same as me. I kind of wanted to invest more into the kind of youth and, build up from the ground. But as one of the few grade 2 bands in Australia, they had to kind of keep up that, that
Right.
kind of appearance. And then it just became a bit too hard for me to literally go to a band practice every week. So because I worked shifts,
Yeah, it must have been difficult. How was it, going from a core player in, some of the best core in Scotland, or it doesn't matter where you're, but for you, like, how was it then transitioning to being a leading drummer? Like, do you feel like I would say, looking at, what you just said in your career, you had different style, between Gordon, Eric, and Arthur, and different sort of like philosophy of things, the police or Boghall system. You had a lot of experiences, right? That could probably, help you. But was it a big change? Did you want it? You felt like you were ready for it? Was it everything you expected? What was your thinking at that time?
I think that I definitely kind of came to a point where, when once you start making like world solo drumming finals, you almost go to like the next level, and people basically expect you. It's almost like an actual expectation. Like, I don't think people expect me to come to Australia and just go and play in a core, because at the time, we didn't have a lot of people here that would have had the experience. Secondly, because of the Boghall thing, I kind of got into I wouldn't mind doing my own thing a little bit, because I helped out with the juveniles. So I used to help Tom like all the time, well, Tom is the master of teaching. I've seen him, how he runs course, how he deals with kids. There's no one better in this world than him in doing that. So I was very lucky. So I think the transition for me from just a core member to being an actual leading drummer was quite easy, because I was already halfway through that process. And the good thing is, I was getting my own fix during our winter months, because I would go back to Scotland and I could just be the core player. I wouldn't be responsible. I just had to rock up, do my thing, and then go home. But then still, 3/4 of the year, I would get my, leading drummer fix. So the only thing that took a while to settle was probably the kind of style that I would basically adopt. From a teaching point of view and how to teach the scores, I would basically grab the Boghall kind of, concept about, starting simple and working our way up. But from a style point of view, I think the style that I learned from Arthur and Eric was probably more suitable. It made it easier for me to kind of, phrase scores and all that kind of stuff. So I would probably say that from a style point of view, it probably took me about a year or two to kind of really get my own style, but it's more towards Eric's and Arthur's stuff. So I was kind of for 2 years from a playing point of view, I was in heaven because I could come to Scotland, do my thing, and then just have fun, meet up with guys like yourself, and that I hadn't seen. But then when I come back to Australia, I would do my leading drummer thing. On top of that, I found there was a lot of pressure here because like we went to the 2012 Nationals and I was playing against a band. It was Ballarat University that they were called at the time, and they
that's right. Yeah.
They were bringing in some kind of big players. They had Glenn Cavito coming in, Tom Hill, who was playing in New Zealand at the time. They were getting all these guys in, and and then in the same breath they go like, yeah, but there's Olav, and he's got all this experience, so he's going to have to put a drum corps on the park of people that I never met. Like I was very lucky that when I moved here, I made a deal with Scotty Burrell, and the deal was right. You play for me, and I play for you. So in 2012, he came across and played for me. I'm trying to think if we did we do New Zealand in 2011 or 2012?
It must have been 11 because 12 would have been a massive year with the concert. I mean, I remember having a massive year because I was playing with the band in Brittany and then Boghall and then Invercargill. It was a lot of freaking scores.
which was really, really, really good. Like Invercargill was probably one of the best.
Super fun.
Super organized, super nice people in the band. And, I got to hang out with you and Scotty Burrell, which was, really, really, really good. So, and then, kind of work just kind of got in the way of a lot of stuff. Like, my career kind of progressed. And then I played as a guest player with WA Police, which was under Chris Johnston, which was very kind of last minute. At the time, Gareth McLeish was in the corps. There were not a few guys in there. So, that was really kind of last minute. I ended up playing a medley, and to be honest with you, it's I'm probably sometimes brutally honest, even with myself. That wasn't my best playing in my career. And then while I was at the Nationals in 2014, I got approached by Kirsty McClellan, who used to obviously play for Jim in shots, and George Shepherd to see if he wanted to start a band, which was the Nunna Wading Pie Band. So they wanted to basically...
All right.
So...
Nice. And then, so... the transition from it's so interesting to hear you're trying to grab all the experiences that you've had and trying to find your own style, which is probably the hardest, right? It's like when you have scores that are written with a certain style and you just walk in and you play because that's the way they are being played, and then when you're on your own and you have to own whatever you're doing, it's like, well, I actually like this from that guy and I remember liking this from that other guy. So it's I'm glad that I'm having this conversation. I'm hoping that people that are listening that maybe wanted to take a core or taking a core or in the process and sort of seeing that there's no perfect answer. It's like you go through phases for a year or two until you figure out your own style. So that's very interesting.
That's the thing, it's like, I find it now, it's like I have a very, very kind of, easy style now. Like, it's not just for me, it's also for the people that actually play for you. So when we started Whitehorse, which was the old Nunna Wading, that was just a completely different experience because George Shepherd was so driven. It was almost like ridiculous. Like, he
was the pipe major, right?
Yeah, he was the pipe major. So he had this plan. He said, we're going to put this band on the park and we're going to turn it into one of the top bands ever to come out of, the Southern Hemisphere. We went very quickly from grade 2 to grade 1. There was a lot of money invested by George. Obviously it's well documented how it ended. That's all I'll say about it. But I had people that had no idea what and how I would operate. And the good thing about George was George very much ran the band, how he would run a band in Scotland. So that's the funny thing about it now. It's like I had all these kids come in who were all 17, 18 years old. Everybody had to pay for their own flights to come to Melbourne once a month. People were scrambling. They were flying the cheapest airlines, to basically save as much money where you were put up at other people's places. But we would literally have band practice from 8:30 in the morning, and we would be on instruments probably by about 11:30, and we wouldn't finish until 4:30. And then
Wow.
it was a solid weekend of just massive playing and massive efforts. And that probably pushed me to kind of come up with my own style a lot quicker because, initially we started and, I was like, oh, well, if we can get a band on the park mid-season, we'd be good, blah, 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 blah. 2 weeks later, I speak to George on the phone, and he goes like, right, he said, well, we're actually competing in 6 weeks. And I was like, sorry? He said, I've got all these guys coming. So, we're going. And I just went like, damn. So, so the good thing about that is I very much ran the drum corps how, Eric and Arthur and Gordon would run it. I would put out all the expectations on the table. I said, this is what I want. If you put the effort in and if you try as hard as you can, and I will do everything in my power to help you. But if I get any inclination that you're not putting the effort in, you're basically out. Which is very unheard of in the Southern Hemisphere because we don't have the volume of players,
Right.
So there's basically a lot of bands that, I'm not saying, they play players that they shouldn't be playing, but they're probably a bit more patient with players because they go like, well, if we're a bit more patient, we might get them there. While George very much had the mentality of you're either in or you're out. So you're either in and you're good enough, and we will help you, and we will do whatever we can to help you. But it's like being at work. If you do something wrong once and you go like, I'm sorry, and you do it wrong twice, you go like, oh, okay, yeah. But you do it wrong 7 times, then people go like, well, that's enough. And we kind of facilitated that. We would help everybody. George was an absolute genius. He would have young kids coming out of private schools, and they were standing next to Craig Monroe, who was like a chili piper. Like I used to go to band practice, and the kid would stand there and look at him and go like, I'm playing next to one of the chili pipers. But that's how he would encourage people, and that's how we got the band where it went.
Right.
So that kind of finished. I really started enjoying the teaching aspect of things. Like I had a bunch of kids, and I had a very good experience kind of group. I had one guy. His name's Mark Romer. He's very well known here. He played in Tom's Court, I think, years ago in the 80s or something at Boghall. He was kind of my, because as a leading drummer you're learning, and I would sometimes come in here and go like, oh, and then he would go like, yeah, let's just take it down a notch because let's be realistic. These guys have no idea what it's like to play in like a drum corps in Scotland, and you are running it like a drum corps in Scotland. So he used to be, and he's still basically in my drum corps now. So that kind of happened, the White Horse thing, and then really I was just done playing with that after that.
Right. It's not, you don't have to talk about this part like you mentioned. I think it was publicly discussed, but it's super interesting how you're talking about the Australia has this in North America as well. You don't have the pool of talent, right? You don't have all of these people that are accessible and that can come within 30 to an hour trip, right? Like Glasgow and Edinburgh's got a lot of talent that bands can have access to. And for you, and I love that you're sharing this with honesty, like you wanted to be very aggressive in the way because the band wanted to do well. And if you haven't had that experience, you treat it still as a hobby, right? And so it might have been like a shock, and you filter very quickly, right? So you may end up with 4 or 5 that are really into it and you build something, or like you say, you try to maneuver. And that's the role of a leading drummer, right? That's something you learn on the job. You find your own style in terms of music, but you also find your own style in terms of like leadership altogether. And I love that you've described how you came about writing the music and like inspiration, but also the different bands that you've led. And you're still leading one band at the moment. Like how the approach to leadership was different.
Yeah, and it's funny, right? Because my first season at Whitehorse was probably the hardest because I'm putting scores out to people that have never ever played with me. So I was very much like I took Eric's approach there. I was very my saying is always it's not what you play, but it's how you play stuff. So like I used to have discussions with Gordon, like when we played the Big Road Brusher. I just I turned around to him one day, so I was like, why are we playing the super technical scores? I said, half the judges probably don't even realize what we're playing, but it's so technical. And he would go like, yeah, but that's what we always did. And I was like, well, I understand that, but like if you look at some of the scores from like years ago, like Bobby Ray, Tom Brown, they were super technical. I'm not saying that the scores these days aren't technical; they're just a lot more musical. And to make it more musical, you sometimes have to take stuff out. And that's one of the things that I kind of noticed when I played for Eric's. He goes like, well, we're actually looking for the music bit. We're not looking for the technical because a judge sometimes doesn't know from the back end if you're playing a set of singles or if you're playing a paradiddle. So he goes, if it sounds the same, but you can phrase it better with this, then why not put that in? Because it's musically more kind of. So my first year at Whitehorse was an absolute nightmare because I had to explain every single rudiment. So because they didn't know. And then eventually at the end of the season, they started to grasp it. So we played for 2 seasons. Then Whitehorse kind of was done. And then I basically said to Mark Roman, because he was more or less my kind of right-hand man, and he still is, I said, I am done playing. I said, I was that disgusted with the whole situation that I was just like, I'm absolutely done. I did not touch my sticks for probably about 2 years. And then I used to fly to Sydney all the time to go and hang out with Mark. We used to play a lot of golf. Like my shift pattern basically was like, I'm off, or I have like an admin day on a Monday, and then I'm off Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So I would phone Mark the week before and he said, oh, what are you doing? Because he used to run his own company. He said, oh, not much. I said, I might fly to Sydney next week. And we would play 5 days of golf in a row, right? And I would have a ball. We would talk about pie bands, obviously, but my kind of playing thing was just done. And then we got talking one day when I was over in Sydney, and he goes like, oh, listen, I'm helping out this local grade 3 band, and I'm struggling for drummers. So I, on the cuff, went like, oh, I'll come and play for you. And then he goes like, well, would you? And I was like, yeah, just for a laugh, just to kind of keep my hand. So I went back, picked up a pair of sticks, and going like, oh yeah, I can still play. And I said, yeah. He said, I said, well, how many more players do you need? And he goes like, oh, he said, I need maybe 1 or 2. So when I moved to Adelaide, there was a local girl here. Her name is Claire Whitehead. She's a gun player. She joined me at Adelaide, and basically wherever I go, she kind of comes along with me. I always make the joke that she has no say because she doesn't. She just goes like, where do we go? So I said to her, do you want to come and play? Because she played with me at Whitehorse. And she goes like, yeah, I'll come and play. And then within 20 minutes, I start getting text messages from all the guys at Whitehorse saying, oh, we hear you playing. So I'm going like, okay. So I phone Mark back and I'm saying, hey, you know how we had this great 3 band and we want to help out? And he goes, yeah, all the guys want to play. And he goes, what do you mean all the guys? I said, all the guys want to play. And he goes like, oh, so that's all the snare drummers. And he goes like, well, he said, if all the guys are coming, he said, I'm not going to be a leading drummer. You can be the leading drummer. So we played with this band called Northern Suburbs. We only did 2 competitions. And it was really just, the reason why I kind of picked it up again was purely because I missed sitting around the table with these people that I basically met at Whitehorse. I managed to get a really solid kind of group of guys together. They were all good mates. We didn't play together for 2.5 years, but they were still in contact with each other, which I didn't realize, right? So when I spoke to Claire, I said, listen, we're going to Suburbs. She goes like, yeah, I'm in. And she says, oh, I just found this other guy. And I said, well, why? She said, oh, we're like gamers. So we game all. So I created this really good kind of friendship. So I was like, yeah, okay. So we did that for maybe a season, and I was like, it wasn't really working out. And, my job then went another level again where I was just working kind of stupid hours until I got contacted last year by Angus Crow, who was the lead drummer for New Zealand Police. And he
Right.
said, hey, listen.
I guess, yeah.
So he said to me, he said, listen, he said, I've lost some drummers. I'm looking to get more people in, but I just need a break from being lead drummer. So how would you like to, come and take the call? So I said to him, I said, oh, okay. Well, let me have a think about it. And then I think I phoned Mark Roma, who's my mate in Sydney, and I said, listen, this is what they want to do. They're looking for numbers. Initially, I think the discussion for me was to just be kind of a draw card for the band, get somebody in with a bit of reputation, then maybe play 1 or 2 seasons and then hand it over to somebody else. So I said, yeah, I could probably do that. My kind of work had settled down. I knew I only had to fly to New Zealand maybe once every couple of months for a practice. So I said, yeah. I think it took me 20 minutes to have 10 snare drummers on the roster.
Wow.
And it's all the guys from Whitehorse. They all went like, yeah, we were in. We got a massive support from the band management and New Zealand Police. And then Nick Eagle came on board as the pipe major. And yeah, it was just like our aim was just to put a band on the park for
Right. And you did play, right?
Yeah, so we played at the New Zealand Championships recently. So, and I said to Nick and I very much sat down and we kind of turned around to management and we went like, right. I said the aim for this season is to just put a band on the park because we were of the opinion that if we don't put a band on the park, then the band potentially could be dead. There was a lot of there was a lot of things that are happening where people go like, oh, what's happening to the cops, etc., etc. We just kind of kept ourselves to ourselves. We put a medley together, we put 2 MSRs together, we went like, right, let's just see what we can do. So, and that's why I'm absolutely loving it again. That's kind of proof to me that what I created with the guys at Whitehorse, like they were all on board almost immediately. We spent a whole week, the week leading up to the Nationals in New Zealand. It was like one massive big family. There was no, whatever I wanted done, they got it done. I got some new guys in. It's the thing that I probably now have to get used to is I've got a drum corps where people play in other drum corps as well, which is fine. I don't have an issue with that. But it's quite normal. And I've always wanted to play in New Zealand after playing at Invercargill because it's such a great set that I've got there. I think they don't have the problem that Australia has where it's so big that you need to, if you live in Perth and you want to compete in Sydney, that's like, that's probably like a 15, 20 grand trip for the band. While in New Zealand, it's a lot closer and they're so kind of passionate about, wanting to improve themselves. They get people across all the time. They have some really, really, really good people in charge of the organization there. Alistair, who we obviously know from Invercargill.
Yeah.
And we got Liam Kernahan, who does a lot of PR that you and I obviously play with in Boghall. Libby, who, a lot of people know. She does a ton of stuff with videoing everything and putting everything out there. So we started off as you're going to be a draw card has now turned into I'm actually really, really, really love playing.
Really enjoying it.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's great to hear. Yeah. I love this story where you're like, and I was done. I put my sticks away and you missed I think everyone that I talk to that aren't playing or stop playing especially after COVID or other reasons is I miss the camaraderie, right? I miss the banter. I miss being at a table around with all the people and play the same music. And I mean that is my case too. And I think that's a common pattern that I'm hearing more and more from people, and that's great to hear. That's great to listen to your story, like how it all went through different routes. It's funny that you end up in the police again after starting in Scotland with a police band. People might think, yeah, that's just who you are, you just go to police band. But yeah, it's where are you at now? Like, this is what's coming up next for the band or for yourself from a drumming standpoint? Like, are you preparing for a competition, or you
Well,
going to it
so,
again, or?
it's technically the off season here, but so the band is play. So last season we only competed once because it was just purely, there was all these people that had never played together. Obviously, the drum corps had more or less played together, but then when you put that with a new pipe corps, you have to blend that in. So we basically said, right, we do the one competition, we get a bass down. There's been some massive recruitment being done. So there's lots of new people coming in. There's some exciting new stuff happening, music wise. So the plan for next season, I think, because we're obviously the complete opposite. Every single Grade One band in New Zealand, apart from New Zealand Police and Invercargill, is going to the Worlds this year. So they're all basically continuing to go on. We've said, let's just, take stock. So the plan is we compete probably 3 or 4 times next season within New Zealand. And then the year after, we potentially want to go somewhere, it doesn't have to be Scotland. We might go somewhere else just to kind of, we just want to build that solid kind of foundation. I just want to kind of take it to the next level. Like I think you don't realize that, but when you get older, you realize that how lucky you are that you've played with certain people and for certain leading drummers. And I think I'm fully aware that, in Australia, I don't do a ton of teaching purely because I just don't have the time. I'm so busy with work that I just don't have the time to do that. But I think the group that I've got, I want to give them whatever I've been given as a player because I want to put them in the kind of perfect spot. As I said to Nick, Eagle, Pie Mate just said, I said, there is no greater satisfaction for me that if I have some people in my drum corps and I see them playing in Grade 1 in Scotland, that would make me the happiest guy ever because it basically means that I've given him the tools to get there. And I think that's what my playing is based on now more. And I think it's also because I obviously live here. If I stayed in Scotland, I might have had my own corps and I might have been, like doing things that Kara are doing or Jake are doing, those kinds of stuff. But I think my kind of perspective has changed because I kind of got older where I live. And that's really it. I just want to put as much into it as I possibly can. I'm already in the back of my mind thinking, yes, I'm not going to play forever, so I want to put somebody in a position where I can just, and I've said this to Nick, let's say in 5 years time, I go like, right, okay, I'm done, but 5 years time, I'm 50, 51. I'll go like, right, I'm done playing, but I've left it in a better position of when I came in. And that's kind of my goal.
That's a lot of rewards that you get personally, right? It's I love having these conversations, and I hope people enjoy listening to them, especially when it's touching on like, right, I am a player, I play in XYZ band, top bands or not, but this is how it changed me as a person, and this is the sort of how I became, who I am based on the experiences. And, like you said, if you're in Scotland versus if you're in Australia, I totally relate because obviously I've been fortunate to live in both. And I think it's brilliant what you're doing. I think it's great. And I love that they are lucky to have people like you, with that mindset and trying to help the scene down there.
Yeah.
To wrap up, because I want to be mindful of your time. You're saying it's quite funny. You're saying work is getting busier and busier, and then the more I go on Facebook, the more I see golf photos. Like, so it's like there's like a funny thing where you say work is getting busier and busier, but then your photos on Facebook are getting more and more golf oriented. So I'm kind of confused. So I want to touch on that. You're obviously really into golfing, also running and biking.
Yes.
I know Rachel is as well. So yeah, you guys are just like getting after it. It's awesome to see. Can you tell us about it?
It's kind of funny because a lot of people, actually most people always say to me, do you actually work? Because, the only thing we see at Facebook is you doing this, you doing that, traveling here, traveling there. Obviously, with the job that I do, is I don't post about my work. So the only thing I post is about stuff that I do. we don't have any kids, so we are lucky that if we have a weekend off, we can go and do stuff. So, Facebook I love because I just use it. And this sounds really bad, but if I put it on Facebook, then my parents and my brother and sister who live on the other side of the world know exactly what I do. Because there is a big time difference. Obviously, like it's 10 o'clock in the morning here, and then it's about 10 o'clock at night where you are, or whatever.
Yeah, 9 p.m. Yeah, almost.
Yeah, so it's just a thing that I'm recently, or a couple of years ago, my sister came over on holiday and she took a photo of me and Rachel on the beach, and I just looked at myself and I went like, that wouldn't be misplaced on the bloody Discovery Channel. She's trying to get a beached whale back into the water. So I just went like, right, I've got to start doing something. She's into riding. We got a couple of mountain bikes. I used to ride when I was a kid. Then I didn't really lose weight quick enough, so I started running, and I absolutely hate running. But, you do a few things, and then all of a sudden, it's a good idea to enter a ultra trail run marathon, which is like 52 kilometers. And then I thought, like, well, if I'm going to do that, I better get a running coach. So then I got a running coach, and now it's kind of, the good thing is I can do that whenever. Like, I'm on a running plan, so I run probably at the moment between anything between 20 to 40 kilometers a week. I've got another event coming up in September, which is 56 kilometers. So, yeah, there's a lot of running happening now, which is good, because I probably am as fit as what I've ever been. And I think, it's just, but that's also the reason why we moved here, the lifestyle, doing stuff outside. It's just completely different. Like, you've lived here, you know what it's like. I can't recommend it high enough to people. I've been here since 2011, so this is my 12th year, and I'm just having the time of my life. So, yeah.
That's so good to hear. Yeah, that's awesome. Even as a friend, like, that's great to hear. But damn, 40K a week, that's pretty good. And golfing too. You do golfing.
The golf the golf is now kind of more on the back because I've got to run that much. I've got all these training sessions that I've got to do. So the way I set it up now is when it's summertime, I'll play golf, and then I'll do my events during the winter because I've turned into a fair weather golfer. So if it rains, I'm not a big fan anymore because it's obviously, we're spoiled here. So I've kind of figured out now that golf is easier to run around, the kind of pipe band season because there's some very nice, there's some very nice golf courses in New Zealand. So Mark and I always go like, oh, there's a competition coming up. Okay, well, maybe we should go a day early or stay a day late, play a bit of golf and stuff like that. So, It's just like, I'm just kind of like, you only live once. You got to do what you want to do and, within your means, obviously. And, I'm very happy.
That's awesome. That's great to hear. You should play with Scotty in New Zealand. I hear he's playing every Friday afternoon or something ridiculous. Yeah. So you should go and have a hit with him. Thank you so much. I know it's in the morning for you, probably ready to get to work, but thank you so much for chatting with me. I appreciate it. It was awesome to catch up. We got a bit of like very nerdy drumming, sort of discussion, and then hearing your full story, which I think is super inspiring, just to see how you move countries, how pipe band, impacted that, and where you're at now. So it's great. It's awesome to hear. So yeah,
thank you very much. Thanks for having me.